Okay, today we're going to solve polynomials, but first of all, I want to make sure that you guys can solve. So I'm going to put a couple of problems up here and make sure that you guys can solve polynomials. And I'm going to start with some simple binomial ones. So, can you solve x plus 3 equals 0? That's a quick question. Can you solve x minus 6 equals 0? Or 6x equals 0. And the last one is 2x minus 4 equals 0. So, quickly, looking at this again, to do this, we can subtract 3 from each side, and we get x equals 3. So that should be simple enough. Or we add 6 to both sides, and we get x equals 6. This is a multiplication, so to undo multiplication, we divide by 6 on each side, and we get x equals 0. On this one, we got to go a little bit further. We're going to add 4 on both sides. That gives us 2x equals 4. And now we've got to go just one more step and do dividing by 2, and x equals 2. So, I want to make sure that you guys are okay with this, and that's not a problem. So if you can do those, then I feel pretty confident that you can go on to solving polynomials. Now the first one I'm going to put up here, the first example is x plus 3 and x minus 6, and it's going to be set equal to 0. So this is a problem that has already been factored for you, and so now I have my factors, and all we have to do is take each factor, set it equal to 0, and then solve. So that means I have x plus 3 equals 0, x minus 6 equals 0. To solve, I subtract 3, and I get x equals negative 3, just like we did above. Add 6, and we get x equals 6, just like we did above. Okay. The next problem I want to work is going to be just a little bit harder, and that's x squared minus 3x plus 18. This is a trinomial that we factored one day earlier this week, and so I'm looking for the factors of 18 that will give me 3. The factors of 18 are 6 and 3. To get a negative 3, the 6 has got to be negative. So if I add these two numbers, I get negative 3. If I multiply them, I get, I want this problem to be minus 18. So if I do that, I put the x in because that's my variable, bring down your 0. So now we have the problem that says x minus 6 and x plus 3 equals 0. So just like I did over here, let's take each factor, set it equal to 0. So x minus 6 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0. I add 6 to both sides, just like I did before, and we get x equals 6 minus 3 from both sides, and we get x equals negative 3. So far, our steps haven't changed too much from our factoring. The only thing now is that I set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So let's just write that side note. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve. That's all I'm doing here. Okay, let's do one more trinomial. That trinomial is going to be x to the third minus 3x squared minus 18x, and it's going to equal 0. Now, I have an x to the third. Up here I had x squared. So if I have x to the third, x squared, and x, I have a GCF. So I have to factor out the GCF first. So number 1, factor GCF. So that now leaves me with x squared minus 3x minus 18, which is the problem I just worked up here. So again, you set each factor equal to 0, but wait, I have to factor this once more because it's a trinomial. So this is x, so the second thing I'm doing is factor trinomial. So that trinomial factors to x minus 6 and x plus 3. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So this is x equals 0, x plus 6 equals 0, x plus 3, sorry, that was a minus 6, equals 0, and then I'm going to solve. So look, here's one answer already done for you. If I add 6 to both sides, we get x equals 6 again. If I subtract 3 from both sides, I get x minus 3 again. Okay, so we have covered factoring trinomials. Let's take a look at binomials because we have to do the same thing here. So this example I'm going to look at is x squared minus 25 equals 0. When we did this in the other night's homework, we noticed that this is the difference between two squares, and it broke down to x minus 5 and x plus 5 equals 0. So when I set these equal, each factor equal to 0, it should be fairly simple to move on. So now I'm going to add 5 to both sides, subtract 5 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 5, x equals positive 5. Now what happens when we have a leading coefficient for our binomials? So here's another one, x squared equals, 4x squared minus 25 equals 0. 4 is a perfect square, x squared is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square. So this is going to be 2x minus 5, 2x plus 5 equals 0. Set each factor equal to 0, 2x minus 5 equals 0, 2x plus 5 equals 0, and solve for x. So plus 5, so we get 2x equals positive 5. Now I have to divide by 2, and x equals 5 over 2. Okay? And the next one, we're going to have to subtract 5, and we get 2x equals negative 5. Then we have to divide by 2, and we get x equals negative 5 over 2. Okay. One more binomial problem, and this one looks totally different from any other problem that we have done. This is 12x squared equals 36x. Alright, slight problem. This one is x equals 0, or the whole polynomial equals 0. This problem equaled 0. This one equaled 0. This one equaled 0. So did this one, and so did all the ones that were above. So I've got to get this one moved around so that I get x equals 0. The only way to do that is to subtract 36x from both sides. So I have a totally new problem. 12x squared minus 36x equals 0. Well, I have to factor out my GCF. So I'm going to write this note because this is something we struggle with. Factor GCF. Remember, that's common number. My common number is 12. Common letter is x. So I'm left with x minus 3 equals 0. Set each factor equal to 0. So this is 12x equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. And then solve. So that means I have to divide by 12. And x equals 0. Add 3. And x equals 3. Okay, So we've covered trinomials, we've covered binomials, and the last thing that we're going to talk about today is going to look at 4 or more terms. So here is where we're going to do the last example, and the last example is going to be a factor by grouping. So this is 4x to the second plus 20x minus 3x minus 15, and that all equals 0. So when you have 4 or more terms, you have to group. So this is factor by grouping. Now, do you guys remember how to group last night? Group the first two. Group the last two terms. Pull the GCF out of the first one. Common number would be 4. Common letter would be x. I would be left with x plus 5. Negative 3x, negative 15. Common number is negative 3. That would leave me with x plus 5. Now, to finish this off, my parentheses match, so I'm going to write my parentheses that match first, and then what's left over goes in the second one. 4x minus 3. And both of those equal 0. So now I'm back to the same kind of problem that I had up here at the beginning. So, set each factor equal to 0. So this is x plus 5 equals 0. 4x minus 3 equals 0. Add 5 to, subtract 5 from both sides. And this is x equals negative 5. Add 3 to both sides. 4x equals positive 3. Divide by 4. And x equals 3 over 4. Now I want to go back for just a minute and I want you to take a look at something. What's the degree of this polynomial? My degree was 2. I had 2 answers. Okay? Going back to this one. My degree is 2. I had 2 answers. Degree 2, 2 answers. Up here, my degree was 3. I had 3 answers. My degree will give you the total number of answers that you should have. So let's go over the rules or the steps to doing this again. Step 1. Make sure your problem is in standard form. Okay. Once it's in standard form, make sure you factor out the GCF. That's if you have one. Then, this step may vary. You're going to factor based on number of terms. So you could have a 2-term, which is a binomial, which is the difference of 2 squares. You could have a trinomial, which is going to use the x factor, or you could have 4 terms, which is a polynomial, and that's grouping. So this is blank plus blank equals b, blank times blank equals c. This one is grouping, and this one is difference of squares. Okay, so I hope that helps you with tonight's homework. Have a good weekend.